Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Astrid Spink, and I am the Sectors and Communities Manager for the public sector and the health sector within the UK. It's my role to work with members within those sectors to build communities, to bring people together, to build engagement and learning opportunities, as well as promoting them and their careers and therefore the qualification within those sectors. I'm assisted in this role by our public and health sector community panel, who help me to shape activities relevant to the sectors. This morning is the start of our Talking Health Sector series of discussions. And this morning we're focusing on NHS reporting with panel member Joshua Garessa and our guest speaker Steve Hubbard, who is Deputy Director of Financial Reporting at NHS England and Improvement. This presentation will be recorded for those who are unable to attend and to be used as a future resource. Before we start, just some housekeeping rules. If you're able to come on camera, please do so. We'd love to see you. But if you're not talking, please do mute yourself so we avoid any background noise. So I'll now hand over to Joshua to give a brief introduction to him and his role as a panel member. And when Joshua has finished, we'll hand over to Steve to share with us his journey around NHS reporting. And after that's completed, we'll then open up for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand or put a note in the chat and we will come to you as soon as possible. So I'll now hand over to Joshua to start off the meeting. Thank you, Joshua.
Morning all. Nice that you have all joined. Welcome to today's first of the start of the series. My name is Joshua Ngaresa. I am ACCA's Health Sector Panel for the Southwest. And our interest and role is to make sure that ACCA cooperates with the health stakeholders in the place to ensure we have all these discussions, what's good for us and what we can do going forward. So thank you all for joining, and I will hand over to Steve to proceed.
Thank you, Joshua. Hello, welcome everybody. So I'm Steve Hubbard, work for NHS England. We've lost the improvement bit now in our latest reorganisation, Astrid. That was last year. We move on every year with the reorganisation, but more of that in a short while. Just to give me a feel for the audience, I'm going to just ask people with the hand raise function on Teams to just give me a feel for how many people are NHS? Because I can see a few names that I recognise from various presentations. If you could just raise your hand. So we've got 12, 13, unlucky for some. Okay, yeah, 13, 14 people from the NHS. So I'm assuming the remaining about 50-50 then, looking at the numbers. And just to give me a gauge for people's experience to date, how many, if you could raise your hands, if you've qualified in the last 20 years or have been qualified longer is the category that I would fit into. So if you've passed your exams in the last 10 to 20 years, could you raise your hand for me? Okay, that's helpful. So yeah, so about 10 people have passed more recently than myself. I think I'm approaching 30 plus years, but we won't go into that level of detail. So my journey in the NHS, I started in the east of England, working for trusts as they were in those days before the onslaught of FTs. Worked for a number of trusts in King's Lynn, Peterborough, the east of England, then moved across to the southwest 25 years ago, I think it was, and have remained here ever since. It was meant to be a short-term move to move back to the east of the country, but we never made it back. And predominantly my initial experience in the southwest was working for trusts, worked in Taunton and sometime in Yeovil. So that was my experience at that stage. I then made a decision to try and work at the centre, see what the centre was like. and moved across to what was the Southwest SHA. And in my 12 to 14 years at the centre, I think I am currently going through my 5th or 6th reorganisation, hence the reference to name change, which I think was just an interesting aside for those of you that work in provider organisations, which are the principal employer within the NHS. There is a lot of change and a lot of flux in those, and I know there's mergers of providers and various changes that go through. But I think it'd be fair to say the amount of reorganisations and changes that happen at the centre are significantly higher, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, to my experience. So that's something I think is helpful to understand from a provider perspective, because that may explain why you're speaking to different people or having contacts with different people on a regular basis, because there is such a significant change. Having said that, my 15 years at the centre, I have been involved with, to differing degrees, the collection of the financial returns. So I currently run the team that collects financial returns in on a monthly basis from commissioners and providers. So we collect those in and report on those, obviously to the directors within NHS England, but also to external stakeholders. And I think, I've worked through the SHA, as it was then, who collected the returns in from the Southwest, and I can see a number of colleagues in from the Southwest. We've then migrated to NHS TDA, collected it in for providers. We then merged with Monitor and started collecting the FT returns in. And then in recent times, we've merged with NHS England to collect in commissioner and all provider returns, NHS trusts and FTs. And I think when I bumped into you, Astrid, was at the national conference, and that was the first time we'd actually been allowed out, if that's the phrase. We hadn't met in person for 2, 3, maybe 4 years. I think I'd missed the national conference prior to that, the HFMA national conference. So I think that was the first time we'd been out and meeting people in person. So it was nice to meet you, Astrid. And the conversation we had was talking about the work me and my team do currently. And I think we'd had a number of thought processes, and particularly, I think we've alluded to the number of reorganisations we've been through at the centre in the last 10 to 15 years. I think one of the conversations I'd had within my team, who were concerned that they'd be made redundant, we wouldn't have jobs at the end of the process, was when we stood back and actually thought about what we did and where we were positioned. It actually gave me some very reassuring reflections, which I'm now going to share with you, because I think it also demonstrates to me what a significant organisation the NHS is within this country, but potentially also internationally. And I think that's just very interesting to observe and perhaps understand. So when we reflected as to whether we would be made redundant and someone else could come in and do our job, what we actually registered was we're doing a collection process that is probably unequaled in this country. What we are doing as a national team is collecting in from, I can see many provider colleagues here, from 200 plus hospital trusts. We're also collecting in from, well, it's now 42 systems, 42 ICBs. It had previously been 150, 200 CCGs. So we're collecting in financial returns from those organisations, and then we're consolidating them and presenting a national position up to NHS England senior team, Julian Kelly, the Director of Finance of the NHS, and onwards to Department of Health and Treasury, and ultimately the Chancellor, I suspect, does still take a keen interest in the financial returns, given Jeremy Hunt was the longest standing health secretary for, well, ever, I think, wasn't he? Yes. Like some water. I've been coaching cricket last night, so I was shouting loudly at the children, so to get them to use a straight bat and to catch the ball, unlike the England team. We reflected on that, and actually, we don't think there was anyone else within NHS England that had the knowledge or the experience of collecting in such a financial return. And when we then reflected on that sort of wider, we reflected that there was probably no one else in the UK that was undertaking such a significant collection. And then when we started to analyse that a bit further, I think the NHS is the third biggest employer, if not the third biggest employer in Europe, if not the world. And when you look at the companies that are ahead of the NHS, you're looking at the Chinese Army, the Indian Railway. I suddenly reflected on that and thought, I suspect both of those have a single ledger or have one accounting system that they collect information on. They don't deal with effectively 200 completely independent providers, 40 independent ICB commissioners, and they don't collect in and have to consolidate a budget of 150 billion on an annual basis, on a monthly basis. So when you start to analyze things like that, you recognize from my team's perspective that we possess some quite unique skills, and hopefully that reassured them going through the latest reorganization process. But what it also did for me was you start to realize the enormity of the NHS, and I know at least 50% of the people on this call are involved in the NHS. I suspect others, because I think looking at the delegate list, there was people who work in care homes, work in organisations that are closely associated with health, and I'm assuming that's why you're on this call, because you're interested in and involved in the health service. But you start to realise the enormity of what the NHS is doing, and the scale that it possesses. And I think, I think the NHS has great opportunity to use that scale to undertake some levels of trials, some levels of experimentation of different types of healthcare, where we can collect data and inform positions sort of internationally, potentially, given the size of the NHS. If you look at, we're serving a population of 60 to 70 million people. If we can harness that knowledge and that experience, I think we can significantly improve the healthcare for the whole of the UK, but potentially internationally as well, if we get some of the IT and some of the infrastructure working as well as it can. And clearly, I've been around in the NHS long enough to know that the single patient record that Tony Blair tried to introduce still isn't really off the ground. And I think, of the trusts here, if I asked you to raise your hands, I suspect there'd be a variety of different PAS systems and various other systems. But clearly, that isn't within our complete gift as financial professionals. What potentially is within our gift is the way we collate and manage financial data. And clearly, we've got a lot of experience at the centre of collating and managing financial data. We're hoping that we can share some of that knowledge with the sector and then share some of that knowledge wider within the public sector. I think, Astrid, we talked about liaising with other public health bodies, but also local authorities and the like, because I think anyone who is looking at or needing to do a large-scale collection, we've got some fairly unique experience, which we'd be happy to share with people. What we have then tried to do at the centre is harness some of our knowledge and experience and try to use that to minimise the burden, and I will refer to it as a burden, of doing the monthly collections for the centre. We've sometimes been referred to as the beast at the centre, but I'd like to believe we're a friendly beast, a bit like the Gruffalo, misunderstood, but once you get to know us, we're quite friendly. So I think we can add some real value there. And one of the things we've done in recent years, halfway through last year, we introduced an automation tool where people could download their ledger into a section of our forms, and with a little bit of setup time. I think it takes a few hours to set up initially, but once you've done that on a monthly basis, you can just download your ledger, and it should feed a significant element of your financial data straight into our financial returns. So I think there's some good mileage there, which hopefully people are using. And we've got significant experience there, which we'd be happy to share with other sectors. The other area, and this will be news to you, Astrid, because this has happened since we spoke after the conference in early part of the year, is we're currently in the process of developing reporting tools, which is more directly linked to systems rather than individual providers and individual commissioners. But we're developing tools where the providers submit their spreadsheet returns, and we principally use spreadsheets, even though over many years IT colleagues have tried to tell us that spreadsheets are not the best tool. I think they are the favoured tool within the finance community, because I think we all understand them, particularly Excel. Although I can remember SuperCalc and Lotus from previous experiences, but I can also remember manual ledgers, so let's not go back too far. So we're sort of trying to harness some of the knowledge that we've got at the centre to develop extraction tools which pull data for a system, pull data out of individual provider returns, and are then able to consolidate that into single data sets and then present that in graphical format. That's a tool we've set up and is being used by systems, and we are making sure we share that with the whole sector, so a provider knows what's being done with its data by the system, so it can see the graphical presentation that we're using. So we're developing that. Start of this year that came in, and we're looking to expand and develop that with involvement of systems. So some good tools there that can be used by anyone effectively doing any form of consolidation of Excel spreadsheets. And then the other tool, and again started the 1st of April for the new financial year, that we're developing, and we're doing this internally at first within our regional teams, is we're using a tool, Power BI, Microsoft Power BI, which we are finding from initial experience to be a hugely powerful tool, and allows us to extract and pull together significant data sets. It effectively allows us to review the current year, but also go back a number of years, and also gives us the option to drill down information. So we're using Power BI at a NHS England level, but we're looking to see whether we can expand that and develop that into systems and ultimately into providers. So we're doing quite a lot of work on that. So I mean, hopefully I've given you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the size of the tasks we're doing at the centre and the type of things we're doing, and hopefully you can see some of the developments we're doing. We're attempting to genuinely help the sector. I'm very conscious from my personal perspective. I joined the centre, say 10-15 years ago, with a naive ambition of reducing the size of the collection forms. Having been on the receiving end of the collection forms, I naively joined the centre thinking I would crusade and reduce the size of the collection forms. To give people a scale of that, I think when I first started doing collections, financial returns were a quarterly return that was sent into the SHA or the centre on a quarterly basis. By the time I left the provider sector, they were a monthly return of some fairly high level figures, 2 or 3 tabs on a spreadsheet. To give you a scale of the context that we're currently collecting in the NHS, and before I tell you the scale of this, I'd just like to confess that I've completely failed in my principal objective 10 or 15 years of reducing the size of the collection returns, as I'm sure every NHS colleague who is involved in the completion of those will fully register. We are now collecting on a monthly basis a financial return that runs into at least 20 tabs on a spreadsheet of cell completion, but could be getting closer to 30 these days. So it's a significant return that is coming in on a monthly basis. And I think I can remember in the early days when they first introduced doing a year end at month 9. I can remember, and I have quoted this back to a number of people, very few people can remember that when they first introduced doing a full year close at month 9, so around the Christmas period for those that of us that are sat doing the accounts, that was brought in as a one-off exception, never to be repeated, and that has managed to stay for the last 10 plus years. So we often get form creep, if you like, and that's something I'm very keen to try and address. And we try and do on an annual basis a review of everything that's in the forms to make sure it is used. So we do genuinely try and reduce the size of the returns. We clearly don't achieve that as often as I would like, but it is something we consider on a regular basis. And I think the other area that's connected with that, and I think is a function that we perform at the centre, which I don't think is understood or recognised by the service, and I wouldn't expect it to be recognised or understood by the service. But I think this type of forum allows me to talk about this area in quite an open and honest way. One of the functions we perform at the centre is continually reducing the size of the ask, and I think we're treading a thin line between the front line of the service, as I like to refer to NHS staff working in hospitals and commissioners, and I'll refer to the beast again, a different beast to the beast that we are, but a beast above us, which is Treasury and DH. And particularly the requirements of individual ministers who are often changing on a fairly regular basis, as we all know and observe from watching politics, I'm sure. And I think we're often criticised for putting in a new collection, and COVID is perhaps a very relevant example where we, I think, introduced 1 or 2 tabs of COVID information to collect on a monthly basis. That was a significant reduction on the original ask that had been given to us and had come down from external to NHS England. I think we managed to more than half the size of the collection return, because I think it started at 5 or 6 pages and we ended up at 2 pages. So we viewed that as a significant result in me and my team. I suspect the service didn't view that as a significant result because it was another 2 pages that they needed to complete. But I think that the good news, which was very difficult to share, is it was much better than it could have been, because you could have been completing 5 pages. So I think that's one of the valuable functions that we perform at the centre, which is never visual to users in the NHS, but is something we're constantly doing, because I think the complexity of the NHS is huge and makes all of our roles quite unique. Trying to interpret performance and interpret financial performance within such a complex organisation is very different to, I believe, working in the commercial sector, where if you produce more widgets and sell more widgets, you make more money. That doesn't quite work in the same way in the NHS, which adds to the complexity of the finance community. Okay, so I think that's probably covered all the bits I was sort of intending to. I think that's about 20 minutes, Astrid. Is that about right? So I'm happy to take any questions, any thoughts, any views on the size of our returns from NHS colleagues.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for providing so much background information and so much detail in a really engaging and interesting way that places things within context and that really helps people, realize the scale of the the financial reporting that you're managing and you're dealing with. And it's really interesting, that, as you say at the end, you are the beast, the friendly beast, the Gruffalo, but you are also dealing with the other beast of DH and Treasury. So there's a lot of beast taming going on
There's a lot of beast
within
taming,
your
yes.
work.
Absolutely.
So yeah, who said finance was dull? So that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate that.